Welcome into the College Sports Guy. This is Harris Hicks, the College Sports Guy himself. So this is an emergency podcast, I'll call it, to where it's not structured, it's not scheduled, I don't have it initially planned, but because there's such an interesting story or something incredibly noteworthy has happened, I'm going to talk about it. And those of you that haven't quite followed this story, whether you've been at work, you just haven't gotten a chance, that's okay. The College Sports Guy is going to catch you up to speed. And that is the Matthew Saluka story out in Las Vegas. For those of you that don't know, Matthew Saluka is the starting quarterback at UNLV. UNLV is 3-0. They've looked great this season. They have a convincing win against Houston, 27-7. So there you go. That's a P4 opponent. They are a legitimate Mountain West and college football playoff contender. That's what they are. Matthew Saluka is sitting out. He's redshirting, reportedly. And it's not because of injury. It's because of this. Read this quote. Matt Saluka said, quote, "I committed to UNLV under representations made to me that were not upheld after I enrolled." You can probably understand what representations means. There you go. Money. Well, Pete Thamel, a trusted college football reporter, very trusted, reported that there was a verbal agreement between Saluka and UNLV. So we know at least that there was a verbal agreement, that what Saluka is saying under representations that were made to him was a verbal agreement. Which goes to this question: was there a contract? Which, reportedly, no contract has been leaked, and it would be incredibly beneficial for both the UNLV PR side and Saluka and the PR side of his team to report the contract, because that would solve everything that there is of all the questions that we have. So since no contract has been leaked, we're going to assume that there's no contract. The reason why I'm talking about this story is because this story is a big deal, and it can become a substantially bigger deal if this in the system does not change. Because this right now, what we're seeing is a complete flaw in what the system brings to the table. Because I'm going to ask you this question. Who's stopping UNLV from saying, we're not going to pay you this. We're just not. Let's say that's what's happening, because I'm not saying that that's happening. We don't quite know the full details yet. Who's stopping UNLV from saying, we're not going to pay you? Who's stopping Matt Saluka from saying, I want more NIL money, and I'm going to hold out until I get it, and I'm going to sit? Nobody. Why? Because there seems to be no contract. There's only a verbal agreement. And my biggest point in all of this is, why do we have a system where you have a kid who's going to go to a school based on verbal representations and not a complete contract? Why do we have that system? Because that is an incredibly incoherent, flawed system. Let me say this. I've seen this a lot. Matt Saluka is getting absolutely dragged on social media for being a quote-unquote quitter. Let me ask you guys this in response to him. If you're promised a certain amount of money to go to work and you don't get that money, are you just going to keep going to work? Or are you going to stop working and demand your money? That's what he's doing. And frankly, because there seems to be no contract, there is no way that he could take UNLV to court and say that I should get this money. Because although there's a verbal agreement, according to Pete Thamel, that there is not legitimate 100% documentation to prove that he should get this money. And therefore, legally, UNLV did nothing wrong. Morally, that's a different story with UNLV, because we have a system to where you can do that. And because there's no contracts, and I'm going to say this thoroughly, we need contracts. We obviously need a governing body. That's no secret. I watched this interview with Dan Hurley, and he was talking about how important it was that contracts happen, because you know what he was talking about is stuff like this. And there are guys that I was actually listening to Bud Elliott talk about this. There are guys who are sitting out, shout out Bud Elliott, reportedly, who are listed on paper as hurt, but could possibly not be hurt. We don't know the full details of it, but I'm just saying, this is more common than you think. With guys who are promised a certain NIL budget and not getting it, which goes to say that, folks, we need contracts. Not just for the reason of the transfer portal, where you have guys transferring in and out and going left and right and school to school, and all of a sudden, more so in basketball than football, if I'm being completely honest. But football still nonetheless very much so needs it. So the exact amount of money that Saluka was reportedly promised is $85K. And here seems to be the deal. If he won the starting job, he was going to get it. And if he didn't, not quite sure. So UNLV isn't paying that, even though he won the starting job. That's the reported information. That is the reported information. That's all we know. I'll say this to UNLV, strictly, to the school. Yes, Saluka probably can't take you to court and say that I should be getting this money. Probably shouldn't. But here's what he can do, is that his team can make this a PR nightmare for UNLV. Because in the system that we have, with NIL being the complete cornerstone of recruiting now, and you go to a guy saying, hey, you should come to UNLV, you should come play for this school, for our school, because we will give you this NIL money. We'll give you this much money. The player can easily say, no, you won't. You know why? Because of this. Because of what happened with Matthew Saluka. This could be a PR nightmare for UNLV, and this could really affect their recruiting. So no, Saluka can't probably win this in court legally, although I'm not quite an expert on being a lawyer. I'm going to say that. If there is someone who has a contradictory opinion there, please feel free to provide that. Provide specifics. But what he can do is he can make this an absolute PR nightmare for UNLV. This can really affect the recruiting. This can really affect their image. And all of a sudden, they have no choice but to pay it. That is a possibility. Yes, it heavily affects UNLV's recruiting. Like I said about Saluka getting dragged as a quitter, before you go on social media and say that he's a quitter, he's a poser, he's this and that, if you aren't getting your money that you were promised verbally at work, would you keep working? And also, look, a lot of people were saying, well, I wouldn't go to work with someone without a contract. And yes, that's a fair argument, but keep in mind, these are 21-year-old kids. Like, these are people who are just learning this stuff. These aren't experienced people in terms of certain paperwork and money and logistics and all of that. It's an easier demographic to take advantage of. It is. Because all of these kids, they're new to this. It's like giving an 18-year-old all this money in the NBA. Like, it's incredibly new for them. And so they are easy to get taken advantage of. And my point is to say is this story isn't just a story that should be focused on what's going on at UNLV and what's going on with Matt Saluka. This is a bigger deal. Because if this doesn't change, we could see substantially bigger players at bigger programs be doing this. Totally. And Matt Saluka is the starting quarterback at UNLV. What if someone is like a Kentucky defensive end and he was promised this much money to go to the school and he doesn't quite live up to the expectations and he sits out in the school, and say Kentucky, this is a hypothetical, Kentucky's not doing this that we know of, to say, hey, okay, even though you're sitting out because you want your money, we're just not going to pay you because now you're not as big of a part of the team. You don't affect winning as much as we initially thought you would. So you have no leg to stand on. We need contracts. We need them now. We need to prevent that from happening. Because now, with money involved, these are essentially professionals, and they have to be treated as such. And there has to be regulation. There has to be a governing body. Honestly, at this point, Congress really needs to step in. They really need to step in more than ever. I mean, whatever it may be, that's what we need. So the Matt Saluka situation is a bigger deal. It is a substantially bigger deal for the sport of college football, and that's why.